The internet is cracked, the show that asks the question, can we coexist with our creation?
Hello, my name is Seth Camillo.
And I am Caroline Risberg, and we are The Internet is Cracked by Addicts for Addicts.
And today we are so very lucky to have Dr. Ben Green with us. He is a professor and author who examines how algorithms and data-driven systems are reshaping our cities and public institutions. Through his research and writing, he challenges us to use technology thoughtfully, embracing its benefits while confronting its risks to equity, accountability, and democracy. He will be releasing his next book, Algorithmic Realism: Data Science Practices to Promote Social Justice, this fall, October 6th. Look for it and buy it. All right, Dr. Green, it's great to have you.
Yeah, nice to be here. I'm excited for our conversation.
Data centers. Who's bearing the true cost of data centers? Is it the government? Is it the people who are benefiting directly, like OpenAI, or is it the citizens?
Many of the costs of data centers are really being pushed onto the public. And so one of the things that I've been studying over the last year has been both what are the impacts of data centers in the communities that they're located in, and then how are communities fighting back against this. In my research, I published a report last year just trying to summarize some of the reporting that had already been done about data centers, which highlighted that they bring higher energy costs for residents. They
Mm-hmm.
are a significant source of noise and light pollution. They don't bring jobs, which is one of the biggest
Yeah.
selling points. Is that they, fail to actually provide the types of economic development that typically are used to justify bringing in industry, and in the case of data centers and many other industries, providing significant tax breaks or other types of financial incentives or benefits for locating in your jurisdiction. Um, and so, these data centers require huge amounts of electricity and water. And it's not just electricity rates, that there's a real strain on the power grid that this creates. Um, Data centers are, guzzling up millions of gallons of water. And the data center companies are not, they are trying to offload as many of those costs as possible onto the governments and onto the public.
And doesn't that disproportionately affect people who are of a lesser financial standing? The increase in electricity costs is something that, if you're wealthy, you might not affect you as much if you're somebody who's living, at near the poverty line. That's a big deal. And so it isn't it something that is, you know, perhaps affecting minority populations more.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it is definitely, utility bills are something that are going to be affecting people with lower means more so, just because, yeah, what some people, if you're more well off, you might get annoyed if your electricity bill goes up 20%.
Mm-hmm.
But you can kind of pay it and move on, and after grumbling about it. But for a lot of other people, they're just trying to make ends meet. And if the utility bill goes up by $50 or $100 a month, that's then that is a very zero sum coming out of some other core expense where they either can't pay as much for food or shelter, or have
Right.
to reduce their use of electricity in a meaningful way. um, and so, yeah, so I mean, I think the rising rates are upsetting a lot of people. Many people across the United States are upset about rising electricity rates due to data centers, but the concern is definitely much more acute for folks who don't have as much money, and this can really limit their ability to either use electricity or provide money on other essential utilities and goods.
I live in the Midwest, and I mean, if you can't heat your home, I mean,
Yeah.
it's not just a matter of comfort, it's a matter of
hmm
survival. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, and I think there's real issues beyond the cost in terms of the stability of the power grid. The strain that data centers are putting is really pushing beyond, really pushing the grid to, and then even really beyond its limits of what it can handle. And I think then this one of the concerns is what happens in periods of high energy usage, right? So you have either extreme heat or extreme cold, where temperature control is needed for survival and health, not just for basic comfort. And the data centers, they want to be up and running 24/7, right?
Mm-hmm.
They're not willing to say, "Oh, well, we'll just get shut down for this period or that period." They want to be up and running, maybe they can go down 5 minutes over the course of an entire year, right? So they're not willing to say we will be good, citizens, and we will shut off in regions where there's extreme power needs so that people who need to heat their homes can do that. Or if there's a power outage, a similar kind of question is, well, what happens if there's major storm outages? In Michigan, we get lots of storms, lots of trees that break power lines. Who will DTE, our utility company, who will they prioritize? Or
Yeah.
how will they balance the interests of getting people back connected to the grid, and the data center companies?
One thing that's kind of interesting is that they're adding to climate change, and they're also then pushing the edges of what the grid can handle. So they're kind of creating the problem that they're also then, inflaming, making more difficult. So it's sort of an interesting, metaphor.
Yeah, no, I mean they're absolutely just yeah, I mean I think that's part of what is so, to me, galling about the data center push, is that, we are in a moment of climate crisis, ecological
Mm-hmm.
collapse,
Yep.
where the world needs to be drastically reducing its usage of fossil fuels, really thinking carefully about conserving water. And then you have this rapacious industry coming in and saying, we want to, put these down, and we will guzzle up, millions of gallons of water, take tons of electricity. And in many places, this has
Mm-hmm.
meant that um, fossil fuel plants are staying online, because that is the only way that utility
Right.
companies can meet the increased demand, is by saying, "Oh, well, that coal plant we were supposed to close,
Yeah.
let's keep that open for at least
Right.
another couple of years."
Amen.
Um, so that's all happening. And then we can talk about whether we think these AI tools have much social utility in and of themselves. But the kind of timing of this, where you have these incredibly water and energy intensive uh, plants, essentially, when we that are pushing us is absolutely in the opposite of direction of where we need to be going as a country. And everyone seems to be, from the companies and most politicians, at least so far, have seemed to just be on board with putting any climate concerns off to the side and saying we need to push for data centers, we need to push for the economic development and national superiority. Um, and so, yeah, I mean, I think there's like both, this is an issue everywhere from the local to the global scale. I mean, on the local
Right.
level, those effects are not so salient, and there are real issues of harm. And then on the global scale, what does it mean to uh, have this rapid growth of data centers, when we are desperately trying to limit emissions and make thoughtful use of the water that we have.
Right. I just heard that they were saying like the companies, the data center companies, that they are gonna pay for it themselves, and us normal citizens, we are not gonna pay for this. Do you think that's even possible?
Well, there's been a huge backlash to the data centers, and in every type of community you can imagine, really, people are upset, and this is across the globe. In the U.S.,
Right.
we have rural communities, more suburban or urban communities. We have people on the left, people in the center, people on the right. Everyone
Mhm.
is upset. Very few people who do not have a direct financial stake in the AI industry are excited about data centers. And so that has been really encouraging to me to see this type of resistance forming and kind of show that
Uh-huh.
it is possible to slow down and stop some of these projects. Um, but yeah, the tech companies, this has, it has prompted them to at least say that they're going to be more thoughtful and try to undercut and
Mhm.
assuage some of these concerns. Um, Personally, I'm skeptical that any of these companies will actually do any of this. I mean, I haven't looked at the exact fine print of what some of these companies are promising that they're going to do. One of the big
Mhm.
issues is that the actual, while saying these things, they're also making all of their contracts with local communities and governments private. So it's incredibly
Ah,
difficult to even know what are the terms of the contract that, OpenAI or Meta has formed with this local government. They're
right.
having policymakers sign non-disclosure agreements. When the contracts are released, most of the details are redacted. So it's actually, there's this kind of double issue where we can talk about the tangible impacts of the data centers, but then there's this real process question of like, well, they're not even letting people know what's going on. They're not even willing to disclose
Yeah.
how much water they're using or what the terms are of the financial
Can I
agreements.
ask you a question? Is this something that's being challenged in courts? Because that seems to me, as a non-lawyer and uh something that your government shouldn't engage in, which is contracts that the public doesn't have the ability to see, understand, weigh,
Yeah.
and make decisions about. I mean, I've never actually heard of anything like that before.
No, me
Mhm.
neither.
Yeah, I mean, it's absolutely deeply undemocratic. The legal side of it is it's harder for me to say. I mean, definitely some people are challenging it, but so far I'm not aware of any projects that have been kind of directly uh reversed on these grounds. I mean, it is typical that, trade secrets is often a one of the reasons why data or information or contracts are not released to the public when they try to, do a sort of like open records or public records request. And so I think that, the sort of idea that these are the information in these contracts is a trade secret is one line of argument that is used to justify not releasing this information. And certainly people are trying to challenge it in court. I think that's relatively like early stage. I'm not sure where that will go, but I don't think we can expect that there would be a legal action that would say none of this is allowed, because I think on some level it is actually governments are allowed to uh do this.
That's not good in
Mm,
my opinion. It's sort of also, I think we're being sold
mm,
to John F. Kennedy. By the end of this decade, we will have a man on the moon type thing. That there is some
yeah.
nationalism thrown into this that is allowing these data centers to get built because people feel like we quote unquote need to win the AI race to be safe.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean there's kind of like a number of arguments that are leveraged to get the policymakers and politicians on board. That's, the nationalism kind of race with China is a huge one of them. Trying to appeal to this idea that, whatever you may think about AI and data centers, the ultimate imperative is beating China. We cannot let them win. So we need to build data centers. Whatever qualms you have with our AI, their AI will be worse, right? Like that's kind of this
Mhm.
boogeyman that is thrown out. That, to kind of undercut anyone who's trying to challenge domestic AI policy. And I think has been really effective in just kind of appealing to people who maybe otherwise wouldn't have a strong, like some politicians who wouldn't necessarily have a strong reason to feel one way or another about AI, but they feel strongly about beating China. And so I think the tech companies have been very strategic and effective in kind of connecting to existing fears and concerns about China and then turning that to their
Mm.
advantage by saying, well, everything that we're doing is actually a way to accomplish this goal that you already have.
I don't know. I feel like it's too everything going too fast for us to understand what's actually is happening.
Yeah, but I think that actually one of the things that's been really striking to me about AI is actually just how unpopular it is, kind of broadly.
Mm,
Obviously, a lot of people use it in all sorts of
yeah.
ways, and some people are excited about it. But when you look at national polls, people are very skeptical of AI. People are far more nervous about AI than they are excited about it. They want to have more regulation for privacy and safety. So there's actually this really interesting disconnect between the kind of policies at the state and national level and what people actually want. And I think I would say that people have become skeptical and aware of the risks of AI far more quickly than we did about prior technologies, right? I think there was a longer kind of glow or honeymoon effect with earlier forms of like earlier forms of digital tech from, some of these same companies with social media, um, or yeah, maybe smart cities and some of like all of the technologies around smartphones and what that could do. I think people are far more nervous about AI, and so I think that also creates more opportunities for pushback. And I think what I'm interested what I'm seeing is I think there's this real disconnect where so many politicians following some of these economic development logics and the anti-China logic, and just a general sense that like technology is good and we should pursue technology logic have been far more positive about these developments than the public. And we've started to see in elections that people are actually bringing their views about AI and their concern and uh, critiques of AI to elections and are starting to, and it's becoming somewhat of a wedge issue or an issue that is affecting outcomes. And we've seen this.
Mhm.
A lot of it has been about data centers, where in places like Virginia, some of the local races really hinged on people, on candidates being critical of data centers. Even in the New Jersey governor's race last November, there was a lot of discussion of freezing electricity rates, and making sure that, and bringing that concern to the fore. Um, in Michigan, data center, there's been a huge data center boom. And we have Senate and governor's races coming up this fall, and data centers are going to be a big topic there. And I think that the politicians have been kind of slowly realizing that this isn't just some esoteric issue. Like, I mean, a year ago, it was a pretty esoteric issue. Like, very few people were
Mm.
thinking about this, but in just the last 12 months, in a lot of places, it's become this huge thing. I mean, Michigan has had so many projects over the course of 2025. Maybe a dozen projects or so were announced and planned. And so, yeah, data center projects. And so all over the state, you have people who are aware of this topic and are upset about it and don't want data centers. And so, you know, I, I I think for the politicians who have been very vocally supportive, it's going to be a real liability for them.
Well, I think you're actually we're the internet is crack, right? So our fundamental belief is that there's a sort of seductive power, and I do think it is there with AI. But I have been surprised with how quickly it came on us. It's been 2.5 years that it's really been something that the layperson would use. But I have two friends who are programmers who will not use um, AI at all in any part of their life because they feel like it makes their lives inauthentic, which is just crazy because there are people working at the edges of what is capable with technology. So I think reclaiming humanity and your own humanity, and also this incredible there's really nothing good about a data center. Uh, uh,
Mm.
and I really question even how what what incentive does a state senator have to vote for a data center? Aside from a okay, we'll be nice and say
Mm.
a donation to their reelection fund, but I can't see because they don't employ many people, do they? I mean, these things take up many,
Right.
many acres, and they don't employ many people at all. There's
Mhm.
people walking around making sure the thing's running, right?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, so, a typical large data center might, once it's up and running, have 25 to 50 employees and, not
That's it?
necessarily, yeah, it's quite small. So, I think for elected officials, there are a few things. One, I mean, the jobs they're the companies made very large promises about jobs, which were not true, but to a large extent, those
Mhm.
promises were appealing. And so, if you think this is how we can bring a large number of jobs, then that's what uh, local officials have been doing for decades, right? You try to bring industry in to bring jobs. Um, there
Right.
are they do employ construction. So these are large construction projects, and that does so for a period of a year, 2 years, whatever it
Yeah,
might
but that's
be,
a short
that
term. That's
that
a
is, but
short
it's short
term.
term. No, I
Yeah. Yeah.
so these are, it's definitely a short term employment. But I think that again, just in the interest, if you're kind of, I think a lot of elected officials are thinking short term. They're thinking about what's going to happen for the next election cycle, or in this
Mhm.
next
Yeah.
3 years or
Yeah.
5 years. So yeah, they are thinking about those short-term benefits, and a lot of times, those labor groups or labor unions are excited. They'll say, "Well, this is a huge project that would benefit. It would provide. We're always work. If you're in construction, you're always working on short-term cycles and looking for the next thing. And so, a big data center boom is great for you. That's what you're looking for. Um, so, I think there's the piece of it. There is some tax revenue that comes in. Usually it's reduced because the data centers get tax breaks. Most
Of
states
course.
now have financial incentives to try to attract them. But they still are producing tax revenue, and so that is just a base of um, income for the state or for the local community. Um, so those are some of the more tangible elements, but I think there are also some additional kind of more um, you know, kind of ethereal or like ideological things going on. And I'm doing some research to try to unpack this and kind of understand the thought processes
Mm.
uh, of these politicians a little bit more. But I think a lot of it is this sense that AI, like there's this kind of sense of like AI is the future, AI is inevitable.
Right.
We want to be part of the AI economy. Like it would be good
Mhm.
for us, as the state of Michigan
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
be a player in the AI economy. And I think there's a
Yeah.
little bit of, you're kind of conflating this vision of, Silicon Valley having all these techies and having like this be
Mhm.
the heartbeat of the industry, as opposed to the data center, which is really like I think of it as like the exhaust pipes of the industry. But still, I think there's this sense of we
Oh,
want to be a player. Where can we, find a new vision for ourselves in the 21st century? AI is one of those things. So I think there's like that kind of
right.
connection that politicians are looking for. Sometimes there's the concern about China is something that kind of motivates them, or um, a general sense that we should be supporting industry, we should be bringing services here. So yeah, I think there's kind of a number of things, and I'm still trying to make sense of it all. But I think there is a little
Mm.
bit of like buyer's remorse here now too, where in Michigan, I I think a lot of people are surprised at how unpopular the data centers are, and so
Right.
they're realizing that this maybe wasn't such a great plan.
And I could see somebody being talked into that, like, "Oh, be a part," a state like Iowa, "Oh, no, you get to now be a part of Silicon Valley, like, you get some chips
Mhm.
in this poker game." But one thing I wanted to say is I find it
Mhm.
kind of interesting that AI is intrusive and the data centers are intrusive. Everything about this technology is intrusive.
Yeah, no, I I agree. I mean, I think that one of the notable things about AI is just this feeling that it has been kind of shoved down our throats across domains.
Yeah.
And certainly there is some kind of in natural or uh, bottom up desire, right? People are going to these apps, and ChatGPT got, so many users when it was first released. So clearly there is a sort of interest among a lot of people. But I think after that initial burst, there's this feeling of every product is being AI is being injected into it. With your school, the
Mhm.
university that you're attending or that you work at are sending you so many emails about AI. Your company is telling I see all these Reddit threads and other posts of people just being like, my managers are just directly evaluating me on how much I use AI, not whether I'm doing my job. It's just so all of these places where people are just, pushing the use of AI into so many areas. And, all of these websites you go to or products you have suddenly are pinging you with like a chatbot or
Yeah,
another AI feature. And
Mhm.
it's like, how do I
yeah.
turn this off? Um, and then of course the data centers are just like a very material, physical manifestation of this same dynamic.
Yeah.
I mean, the, and I think this really just connects to this broader kind of hype around AI. The tech companies are desperately trying to justify the massive investments that they're making. They're trying to find what products they can actually create. Like, what is an actual viable business model for AI? Like, they actually don't
Mm.
know that. So I think there's this push to get everyone everywhere to start using AI, hoping that something will stick, and then they can figure out how to, make some money with all of this. And then that's pushing all of these organizations like companies and schools and universities and governments to feel like to kind of get caught up with these narratives and feel like, oh well, we have to jump in because this is the future. If we don't, if we sit idly by, everyone else will pass us by, or we're going to miss all of these opportunities. So I think that the tech companies have been really effective at creating these narratives and this sense of inevitability and this sense of urgency among so many actors to feel that they have to embrace AI and find ways to use it.
To building all the data centers, and they're pushing for the data centers, and that's going to be so great for my city, right? But what are the hidden trade-offs, or that we as a community should understand?
I've been really impressed with communities' ability to uncover these things and very quickly understand what those issues will be. I mean, so people are concerned about um, electricity rates, as I mentioned earlier. They're concerned
Mhm.
about water usage. Not, and I'd say the water use is less tied to price and more tied to just a sense of conservation. That like our water is precious. There's a limited, even if you're not in the desert, there's still a limited supply of water. You don't want to just be,
That's
letting
true.
some massive company uh, kind of take that all. You have to think about stewarding that resource for the future, right? Even if right now there may not be an immediate crisis of water. I think people are responding as well to, there's certainly, the financial incentives, the tax breaks are something that people are upset about. Like, why are, if OpenAI or Meta or Google are coming, like, why should they be, uh, why are we giving them money or like giving them a break in order to come here? These are the richest companies in the world.
Mhm.
For a lot of communities, there's concerns about the physical location of these sites.
Yeah.
The companies are
Yeah.
often trying to place them. I'm sure you've seen this in Iowa too. In like rural farmland, um, and that is often maybe the most cost effective place to put these data
Yeah.
centers. But that is a real kind of imposition and break from for those communities. They're like, we don't want this giant facility in our
It also messes
backyard.
with
Or
the ecosystem of
absolutely. Yeah,
and
so
go ahead, sorry.
no, oh yeah,
Sorry.
no, I was just gonna build. I mean, there's the light, but there's also the noise and the vibrations
Yep.
that can have harmful effects to people, to animals, to crops. And so that's a real issue. And then you think about, what is the lifespan of this building? What happens after they leave? I mean, whether it's, I think there's some concern that some of these data centers, there may be a bubble burst, so these companies lose money and the data center never gets used, or it's only used for
Oh.
5 years. But even if data centers are not 100-year facilities. This might be a 20 or 30-year facility if in a that's kind of
I
a
think that's a
standard timeline.
I think that's a very, very good point. Is people get when you talk about bringing a factory that's gonna essentially, as far as people, their lifetime is infinity, so if you're bringing a factory, that seems like something that's going to be there for a while and provide jobs and provide, and even I'm thinking about, there's so much economic talk about professional sports teams getting funding to build stadiums,
Mm.
and it's always a bad deal for, well, okay, I'm sorry, maybe it's not always a bad deal. It seems to be mostly a bad deal for citizens who, do these bonds so that the Chicago Bears can have a better, a $5 billion stadium or whatever. But I think
Mm.
what's hitting people is, yeah, the finite nature of this. And what you were saying is that who's going to benefit?
Yeah.
Some people who build it, and then that's it.
Yeah, and I think the other piece of the finite nature is that when these facilities are placed in, you know, are taking over someone's farm,
Yeah.
there's really not a path for how that could be used productively once the data center
Yeah.
is done, right? So, because these are not facilities that can really that easily be repurposed for other uses, but also it's not a location where other people would want to.
Yeah.
It's not like some other factory would come in and say, "Oh, well, we can take this building," because most places, most industry wouldn't want to be located in the middle of, farmland, right? To them, that's the middle of nowhere, right? Whereas at
Right.
least if a factory is located in an industrial area with other factories or something off the highway, in a more, then if, one company leaves, some other company can say, oh, well, this is a convenient place. We can repurpose this building, or we can at least, take the building down and build something new on the foundation or whatever, but at least the location is kind of appropriate for that use. Whereas, you can envision some of these communities just being stuck in, 2060 or something with just this abandoned warehouse where the land can't be repurposed. There's
Mm.
nothing, no other, and there's no actual economic value to that land anymore.
How big is, like, a big data center, like
Mm.
open AI center?
I'm blanking on the exact number, but I mean they can be, many hundreds of thousands of square feet, the size of multiple football fields. These are large. This is not like a barn. This is like a very large
Yeah.
facility, and there's obviously some range depending on the size of the data center, but the large ones are quite massive.
Nobody's turning a profit or even coming close to turning in profit, which also makes you question the validity and of in the time frame that these things are gonna be useful for. They may
Mhm.
Yeah,
useful for 2 years.
Yeah, I mean, it really is just a kind of added dimension of risk or insecurity around signing up for a data center because, yeah, as you said, I mean, all of these companies, the data centers themselves are incredibly expensive. Uh, the tech companies are pouring billions of dollars into
Mhm.
this infrastructure. They're actually don't have that much revenue from from their AI
No.
products. And maybe that will increase, maybe it won't. And I think one of some of the other issues with this are so much of the cost of a data center is in the chips, the GPUs
Yeah.
that are used to train
Oh.
and run AI. It's not just That's why it's so expensive. It's not building the building, it's like mostly paying Nvidia and some other companies for the chips. But those chips will need to be, you have to those the building a building lasts for decades with maintenance. Those chips need to be purchased new every couple of years, possibly every 3 to 5 years for a state of the art facility. So it's not such a fixed cost where it's all at once and then you can kind of ride off of that. There's going to be very high maintenance costs I expect for these facilities in terms of upkeep of purchasing new chips every couple of years so that they can continue to run the systems. So that's a real concern. And so I think even a lot of the harms of data centers are just assuming that they actually get built and actually get used, there's plenty to be
Mhm.
concerned about. But this extra layer of what happens if you don't, the company runs out of money, or the deal goes bust, or a company goes bankrupt, and you could be then stuck with a half built facility or a built facility that was only running for a year. And this also means this also then connects back to the grid, because the utilities are making massive infrastructure upgrades, because they're saying, oh, we need to power this additional gigawatt of energy for this data center. We need to build new facilities, put in new lines, whatever it might be. That's very expensive, and they do that in the expectation that you know at least to some extent, they're passing that off to consumers anyway, but to some extent that, okay, well, the companies are going to pay us for that. We're going to get all of this revenue from, you know, 20 years, say, of the data center using our electricity. If they go away, what happens? Like the infrastructure upgrades already happened. Someone still has to pay for that. So one of the things in some of these that you can push for in a contract would be that the companies should be paying the full share of the infrastructure upgrades
Yeah.
that are required, and that should be true
Right.
even if they go away. Like, they are on the hook for that money whether or not they actually become operational, because they are
Yeah.
prompting the need for this infrastructure now, and they don't get to in a year walk away and say, oh, this deal didn't work.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so now, but you're just left holding the bag, and
The
then
free
they
riding,
pass
the
it on
free
to the
riding.
consumers. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So a lot of this comes down, some of the financial stuff comes down to what's in the contracts. We don't really know, and there's very little enforcement. There's very few laws on the books, at the state level, that would say that any data center in our state needs to satisfy these conditions of a contract. Like, that's doesn't exist as far as I know.
And what's interesting, what you just said about the quote unquote maintenance is not actually maintenance. It's like you're rebuilding every 3 years. It's like a complete rebuild, right? I mean, it's 80% of the cost of the initial investment, right? To get all the
I think it's
new
about
NVIDIA.
50, but I've heard is like 50-60%.
So that's
So
insane.
very substantial. Yeah.
That's a big gamble that they're going to be able to do that every year. And
Yeah.
there's
I mean, this
definitely
is
is this, when Caroline and I were talking, it was a little bit like a landfill. Everybody wants them, but they don't wanna be near them.
Right.
You know?
I have a question. Like, just because of the power grid. I mean, how can we do we actually have enough power for all those data centers? How does that work?
it's a big, I think power generation is
Mm.
one of the big bottlenecks that will slow down data center development, just because you can't actually run until you have the hookups to the power. But I think this is also a little bit a matter of degree, um, where a lot of data centers, they use backup or additional power by using like gas turbines or generators. So that's a way
Okay.
that a number of data centers have tried to go beyond what the grid can actually handle. Um, and this is an issue because it creates, huge amounts of pollution. Like in Memphis, Tennessee, there's been a lot of issues and fights about one of the, Musk XAI data centers that's been using these turbines and just spewing pollution into this, low income minority neighborhood of the
Yeah.
city. So that's a huge issue. But then there's also then the source of the power, right? Is it renewable energy, or is it from fossil fuel energy? And so one of the ways that we are meeting the demand is by keeping fossil fuel plants open. So, I have seen articles of like, oh, the data center boom is great for the coal
Mhm.
industry, is great for the
Yeah.
natural gas industry. Like,
Mhm.
this is good for them because this is kind of giving them maybe a lifeline is too strong, but like this additional kind of push where like it's harder to get rid of them. And so, you know, a- again, it's like where having enough energy is somewhat a matter of like what counts. And so that's kind of this question of like within the uh and it's like, where do you sacrifice? Do you, as a country, or if you're a policymaker, it's like, do you say that the constraint is energy, and we can only have data centers to the extent we have renewable energy that can support these facilities on top of all of the other things we need to power? Or is
Mhm.
it, oh, well, we need data centers, so we just got to get whatever way we can power those, we'll power those, whether it's, generators or the coal plant that was supposed to close, like that's fine. Like that's it's more important to just get whatever we can. And that latter approach has definitely kind of been what's been going on, which is concerning. And the tech industry is definitely pushing for nuclear as
Oh, they
as
are?
part
Okay.
of there's been kind of, like, renewed talks to try to
Yeah.
get nuclear as an energy source, and at least to some degree are branded as like a clean or cleaner energy source. I think Microsoft has agreed to take over and reopen 3 Mile Island, something to that effect. And so
Yeah,
that's kind of this other
It
kind
has
of
a great
return
track
of
record.
nuclear is, yeah, nothing, no
Nothing bad can
symbolism
don't look
there.
here, don't nothing nothing bad can ever happen, as I heard about them, opening up 3 Mile Island, and I'm like, I guess time just goes by and people things just they forget about it. I mean, when you have multiple TV movies made about your nuclear power plant, you have a problem. But one question
right.
I have is, before we let you go, I'm very curious about this, which is going back to your smart city stuff, and is that people often are docile when technology is introduced, but for some reason, this has really gotten people up in arms in a way that I I
Mm.
I I think is surprising to me. And could you speak to why you think that this issue has triggered people in a way that like even things like flock cameras seem to not
Yeah.
bother people nearly as much as AI centers? What is it about it?
Hmm. Yeah, it surprised me too. I mean, I did not expect when I started working on this topic just how many people who don't kind of like study technology for a living have gotten amped up about this issue and concerned about it. And I don't know that there's a single explanation. I think to some extent it builds on the decade of experience that people have with the tech industry of just kind of seeing where, maybe in the early 2010s there was a nice glow around it and people thought it was great. um, and then we've just had, especially since 2016 or so, this just recurring crises and just more and more evidence that these companies are willing to sacrifice any notion of the public interest or safety in order to gain power and profit. um, so I think people are coming into this with that experience and saying, okay, well, these
Yeah.
are the companies that are doing it. We already kind of know their track record. We know what they stand for. I think it's notable that this data center uh, boom, the 2025 is really when data centers took off. That also is aligns with the timing of these tech companies really embracing the Trump administration.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
a
Yeah.
lot of data center stuff was, it's not that the all of the data center boom is tied to Trump, but I think the companies, it's like further, and obviously some people are fine with that if you're a supporter of Trump. But I think for a lot of people, it's kind of like, okay, these companies are further showing their hand, showing where they stand
Yep.
politically, in order to gain power. When previously there was this kind of notion of Silicon Valley as liberal, kind of more connected to the Democratic Party. So I think just further enables a lot of people to be skeptical of these companies. And I think it's just like the material side of AI. It's not just, oh, here's a thing that is maybe annoying or a little bit strange. Like the data centers have very material impacts. There's lots of concern about, is AI going to take my job? Is it going to make everyone
Right.
unemployed? And whether or not that actually comes true, it's like that is not a very popular
Yeah.
line among the public. But
No.
and I think people are seeing the effects it's having with kids in schools as well. Like it's,
Yeah.
there's just an article today about all of these AI generated videos for kids on YouTube, and it's,
Mm.
I have a 2-year old, and I'm like, I don't think I would
Oh.
never just let her roam on YouTube freely. I mean, now she's 2, but even in a few years, like just the slop that is filling our feeds. I think people can just see it. You're just kind of confronted with it, and it's such a uh, everywhere in your face all the time,
Yep.
that it's, I think there's just like many different angles where people are able to kind of feel the negative effects, whether they're here yet or see them on the horizon.
Well, we need to let you
Yeah.
go, but I think that a lot of it, in my personal opinion,
Yeah.
has to do with maybe you can't outrun your history with these companies. They haven't necessarily comported themselves well in the past. And we don't
Mm.
trust them in the future. And I think also, uh, I think it's not the Jetsons. It may be your job. You know what I mean? And I think you're right. I think it has at a very fundamental level um, hit people in a way that I'm surprised by. But I think that was a
Yeah.
very eloquent answer. But we really thank
Yeah.
you for coming. I know you
Yeah.
need to
Thank
leave.
you so
Yeah,
much.
thank you. This was a fun
Thank
conversation.
Yeah, it was great. Thank you. Really appreciate it.
All right. Bye bye.